so lucky and so privileged and so fortunate to have someone who has kept our history 5 decades now, probably, of our history.
Yeah.
And that's so incredible. Big hand for Dr. Blaney.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
He is a legend in his own right. Whenever you say, oh yeah, we're going to have Dr. Dwayne, the place fills up. Everybody wants to come and he gets new pictures, he gets new stories. I love it. So Dr. Dwayne, up to you.
Thank you very much, Joel. I don't need that.
You know what? You're right. I don't either.
The first thing I want to mention, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a real pleasure for me to meet a lot of the old timers again. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment or two. But tomorrow at 11:45 at Queen of All Saints, we got a meal free. At 1 o'clock, we got Pete Dunda and his band playing the polka. We are going to pass the hat for that, but the beer is free also. So 1 o'clock polka, 11:45 the meal tomorrow. I'm going to start off by telling a little personal story that means a lot to me in Crested Butte. When I came to Gunnison to teach at the university in 1962, I was hired over the phone, and I'd never been to the West. I'd never been to Colorado. So I got a one-room place on South Main in Gunnison, and not knowing anybody, I thought I'm going to take a drive up to this town called Crested Butte. Now, my dad was born in Antwerp, Belgium, and he spoke with a clipped accent every day of his life, a second language. I come up to Crested Butte, and I meet some of the old-timers, and everybody is speaking with a clipped accent. And I said, and I can to this day remember saying it under my breath, said, Vandenbusche, baby, you are home. And I will remain home because I got a plot in the Crested Butte Cemetery. When I kick the buck, I'm going to be with all my friends. And when I see St. Peter at the Golden Gate, I'm going to tell him I'm an elevation guy. I do not want to be asked to take the elevator down. So, having said that, Crested Butte has always been a very significant town in the Industrial Revolution of the United States, and I'll tell you why. We had 154 coke ovens, and to make steel, you got to have coke. And that coke was taken by rail to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. To make steel, you got to have lime. And on the east side of Monarch Pass is the CF&I limestone quarry, now owned by Colorado Limestone, which is a subsidiary of this. And they still mine that in the summer. And then, obviously, you have to have iron. And iron was brought in by rail. All this stuff coming together at the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where I come from, this is called the Copper Country and the Iron Country. And we got names of towns like Iron River, Ironwood, Iron Mountain, Calumet, and Bessemer. And in 1856, an English scientist named Henry Bessemer invented the blast furnace. And now, the coke, the iron, the lime, all came together in the big ovens, in the big furnaces out of the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. And he invented that blast furnace to blast air into that furnace and drive out more of the impurities. And that is how they converted iron into steel to power the U.S. Industrial Revolution. Iron melts 2,300 degrees. Steel melts 4,600 degrees. And if you take a little molybdenum or tungsten or vanadium, it hardens the steel and it doesn't melt till a lot higher. And of course, in Crested Butte, all of you know the story about the molybdenum. Early Crested Butte was known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains. Nobody ever thought too much about coal. It was a jumping off point to get into all the great silver camps around it. Crystal and Gothic and Irwin and Tin Cup and a lot of others. That's where the railroad was, coming in 1881. That is where the supplies were, and that is where the early smelter was. So when you're jumping off from Crested Butte, you're going to all these great camps. And then, because of national and international politics, the price of silver began to plummet. And in 1893, they had the silver panic. And the silver panic caused the price of silver to go to 58 cents an ounce. And every great silver town in the West, including in the Gunnison country, went to the wall and became ghost towns. Even places like Georgetown, even places like Nevada, they all went to the wall. And wasn't anybody there anymore. And then Crested Butte turned to its destiny, and its destiny was coal. 9 coal mines centering around Crested Butte. One on January the 24th, 1884, blew up just west of town. And that was the Jokerville, killed 61 cousin Jacks. All these miners were from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, seeping methane gas. But then, as you come into Crested Butte from Gunnison on the left side of the road, you'll see some blotches. And that is where the Pueblo mine was, and the Buckley mine was, and the Robinson mine was. So now we're up to 4 mines, including the Jokerville. If you go to the lower loop, you came to the Pershing mine and the Peanut. Now we're up to 6. In 1892, the 3rd biggest coal mine in Colorado opened up on the bench, called the Big Mine, owned by CF&I. 400 employees, 7 underground miles of tunnels, trains, 100 cars going out through Gunnison, 4 engines put on the front at Sargent's to get it over Marshall Pass, and eventually down into Pueblo. And then we had 2 great anthracite mines. One was located 4 miles up the Slate River. Locals call it Cloud City, but it really was Smith Hill. That's where the mine was, up above, and anthracite down below is where the breaker was. And the anthracite coal came out of the mine 200 feet, came down a gravity tram, the full cars going down, pulled the empty cars going up, 1,638 feet down to the anthracite finishing mill on a degree slope of 33 degrees. It was at that time, when built in 1883, the largest coal breaker west of Connellsville, Pennsylvania. 5 stories high, 80 feet high, and the coal was broken up into fist, orange, nut, pea, and slack. That area would close up sooner rather than later. But as it started to wind down, the greatest breaker of them all in the United States came about 13 miles to the west of Crested Butte on Anthracite Creek, and was called Floresta, where now you had a 5-story high breaker built for $100,000 in 1898. 2 problems. Number 1, the railroad could only run from, if you're lucky, a little bit of May, June, July, August, September, October, that's it. So the railroad could run for about 5.5 months out of the year. And the other problem was that the coal at anthracite tilted, and it was very difficult to mine. But in the years that Floresta operated, 1898, when it was built, to 1918, 800,000 tons of coal came out of Floresta on the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, headed out to other parts of the United States. Floresta had a 1 million ton slack dump that they sold during the 1920s. Anthracite had a 400,000 slag dump that they sold in the 1940s for $1.25 a ton. And it was used in a steel fluxing process down in Texas. The big mine shut down 1952. Others shut down before or soon thereafter, and the era of coal was over. Now, the railroad had arrived in November of 1881. Up to that time, Maroon Avenue was the main drag in Crested Butte, but not anymore, because the depot was on Elk Avenue, and Elk Avenue now became the major avenue of Crested Butte. Going through the paper not too long ago, I ran into the following statement. Charles Nicolai, $5,000. Tony Verjou, $342. Aubrey Spann, $2,555. Virgil Spann, $2,700. Were all paid for the realignment of the Crested Butte Road coming into town. 1961, 1962, Dick Eflin, Fred Rice come in. Walk into Tony's Tavern, saw Tony Capuchin, wowed him about the scenery. Tony Capuchin very dryly said, "You can't eat scenery." The age of coal was now over, and the age of snow and recreation began. Skiing, mountain biking, flower festivals, music festivals, four-wheel drives. And then came the young people, the hippies, few trust funders, and there was tension in the town. Now, I just done a little research and did a little article on the water woes of Crested Butte. And I think I can tell you when that finally ended, the tension. Because during the winter of 76, 77, the water line into Crested Butte froze up 1.8 miles. And they got pipe in from Grand Junction. And the guys who did most of the work were the young people, the hippies that did all the work. Dick Archuletta's angle, Paul Hitchcock's angle. And they got the thing rebuilt. They're celebrating in the talk of the town. But while they were celebrating, the water wasn't flowing, it froze up again, and they had to redo it again. And in my opinion, that is when, finally, that tension ended between the young and the old. So here we are today with more questions than answers. You read about it in the paper every day, don't we? But I always consider it one of the real lucky moves of my life. I'd never been out here, so I just happened to come here. But sitting around with the old timers, I would ask a question and there would be about a 5-second pause, and then Johnny Panion would say to Josiah, "Well, hell, that was Harriet's second," and then they'd all start talking and I start taking notes. One day I was with Johnny Panion at the Buckley mine. Showed me how the coal came out of the mine, down the tramway, into the tipple, into the railroad car. So we're over at Cochever's. They had the roulette wheel out by the window at that time. And pretty soon about 7 or 8 other old-timers came in. And I leaned over to John and I said, "John, I still don't quite understand something about how the coal came out." Johnny Panion did this. "What the hell's the matter with you?" he said. "Are you stupid or something?" And everybody laughed, including me, because I was. But I was learning. Enough said, let's go ahead and hit the slides. It was $1.25 an ounce. And they got a law called Gresham's Law. And it said that the dearer the metal, the higher the value. And there was a lot less gold than silver. And as a result, gold was more important than silver, price-wise. So gold sold at 20 an ounce. Silver sold at $1.25 an ounce. $1.25 times 16 to 1 ratio equals $20. So 16 to 1 ratio. This is Elk Avenue, 1883, the old rock school. Next. Whoops. There you go, everybody. There is the Elk Mountain House on the left. That was Crested Butte's answer to the Levita Hotel in Gunnison. Had 34 rooms, built in the early 1880s. A really nice place. Next. There is one of the early buildings on Elk Avenue. This was again in the early 1880s. Next. Another one of the very early buildings on Elk Avenue. 1880s. Next. Elk Mountain House. All those people in front, they got customers. It was a magnificent building, and later on became still a magnificent building. Next. There it is when it was fading in the 1920s. Had seen the better days. Next. This is Rosich's Saloon. I think it's now known as the Public House, with that little girl sitting next to a spittoon, which is very dangerous. Next. Rock Schoolhouse, 1880s. Next. Rock Schoolhouse. You can see there's nothing there, and they got a wooden, kind of a wooden sidewalk to get you in. It had more people in the Crested Butte School in the early 1890s than any school in the Gunnison country. Next. That is called the Cut, and I think the old timers can help me. That's just to the south of Crested Butte, right? And that train is off the tracks. And you can see one of the buildings of the coal mines there, the white. Next. This is another shot of the train off the tracks. That's not a very good shot, but that was a place where avalanches came down and would knock the train off the track. Next. The building of the CF&I Big Mine, early 1892. Next. There is the big mine. And that white area you see going uphill there to the right, 156 steps enclosed, and that's how you got up to the bench. And initially, that is where the first school, well, one of the first schools was. Next. There are the coke ovens. Bituminous coal heated red hot to drive out the carbon dioxide. Next. Hose company. Fire department. They got races on the 4th of July. They're pulling the wagon and the hose. This is 1884. And they had tremendous contests. Crested Butte against Gunnison. Baseball game, Crested Butte against Gunnison. And right where the park is, where the totem pole is, they had one of the most dramatic events ever, if you've ever had a chance to see it, as a tug of war. With the ranchers against the coal miners, and nobody wanted to lose. And a lot of money bet. Next. This is a train that is starting to go towards Floresta. And that is a rotary blade blowing snow off the track. Now that was perfect when you had just snow. But if you had an avalanche with rocks and logs, obviously it ain't going to work. Next. There is one of the barns, the front of one of the barns where horses were kept in the background, and that's just off Elk Avenue in the 1880s. Next. This is the big fire of 1893. And you can see the fire hall off to the right. And I've told this story many times. The wind was blowing, and they needed to blow up a building or two to keep the whole Elk Avenue from burning down. But they forgot in the two buildings that they blew up, there was dynamite in the buildings. It blew out 4 more buildings and made a gaping hole in the fire hall. Next. There's the gaping hole in the fire hall. You didn't want to be near there. Now, one of my jobs in the summer was blowing up stuff with dynamite, logs and rocks and so on a road job. And I can tell you got to be careful with dynamite. And there's a reason why they freeze it. Because if it sweats, that's nitroglycerin, and you give me about 5 drops of nitro, and we can blow a lot of stuff up. Next. There is the coal train and the depot on the left ready to head out. Next. There are the coke ovens again with the train right in front. Next. There are the coke ovens when the good days are all gone. This is after 1952 when the big mine is shutting down. That's the way they look. Next. There is a religious march right down Elk Avenue. In the early days, they had all kinds of St. Mary's and Pythias and so on. You had all these different organizations, Catholic organizations, and they all had uniforms, and here they are marching down on a religious holiday. Next. This is hauling logs right down to Elk Avenue. Sawmills were absolutely crucial in the early days of the Gunnison country because the railroad didn't run everywhere. And when you had to build stuff, you know, I think John Rosman, Josiah both told me this a couple of years ago. I said, how in the hell could they have that ski race on Gibson Ridge with all those trees? There weren't any trees, they said, because they cut them down for mine props and railroad ties and cabins. Next. There's a really early shot of Crested Butte, certainly in the 1880s on a dark and gloomy Christmas day. Next. There is a train off the tracks, and I mean off the tracks, in the cut coming towards Crested Butte. Next. This is a 4th of July celebration, and I think, Steve, how old are those cars? Yeah, I always, in the back of my photograph, it said 1919, the day after, day after Armistice Day. They are marching in Crested Butte, just as they'll be marching tomorrow up to the cemetery. Next. There are those 156 steps. And everybody I talked to said they were tough. Next.
Back up a bit. I'm going to tell you a little story about that.
Go ahead, Joe.
People would take tires that were just laying around and roll them down and see who could get them all the way to the end. Nobody made it, if anybody. Those tires would come rolling down there, and you have to be careful because there's, on the other side of these tracks now, there's houses. And a lot of those people had horses, like pushes and.
Wow.
But anyway, yeah, the kids would put the tires up there to see how far down they get. Well, you gotta have entertainment.
Okay, next. There is July the 4th, 1918. The armistice will be signed in about 4 months, ending World War I. You can see the public house now, the public house and the city hall. Next, hauling in the body of a man who had died. And what they did in the old days, and they do this out in Minnesota when I grew up, with the ground frozen, and I was a pallbearer out in Lutzen, Minnesota for a great skier named Dave Quinn in the middle 1970s. They take the coffins and they put them up on different shelves in a blockhouse. And I'll tell you what, it was one of the most eerie feelings I ever had. So that thing is taken to a blockhouse at the cemetery where it stays cold until everything thaws and they can dig the grave and bury them. Next. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of people don't realize, I just finished a book called Fever in the Heartland. It's about the Ku Klux Klan, primarily in Indiana, but around the U.S. So if you got a minute, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. In 1867, a guy named Nathaniel Forrest started the Ku Klux Klan in Pulaski, Tennessee. And initially, the Klan was started to prevent black people from having their rights that they earned as a result of the Civil War. When that was accomplished, there was a big sellout and the black people didn't have their rights. When that was accomplished, the Ku Klux Klan faded. And then around 1915, immigrants began to come into the U.S. And they were Catholic. And Jews were hanging around. And as a result, a guy started a movie called Birth of a Nation. And Woodrow Wilson, our president, who originally his family grew up in Georgia, had that movie shown in the White House, and it glorified the Ku Klux Klan. And from that time on, the Ku Klux Klan was revived. Anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-Jew, anti-practically anybody who wasn't blue-eyed and white. They burned cross at Chocolate Peak. They marched down Elk Avenue. They burned a cross on W Mountain. The mayor of Denver, John Locke, Klan. The governor of Colorado, John Locke, Klan. Ben Stapleton, mayor of Denver, Klan. State legislature, Klan. All local officials, Klan. You couldn't be elected dog catcher without having support of the Ku Klux Klan. And a lot of people were murdered and intimidated. H.L. Mencken, the great writer of the Baltimore Sun, probably had the best comment about the Ku Klux Klan. He said, it gave the village idiot a chance to dress up in a white hood and white dress and engage in hocus pocus. The Klan, however, now began to fade in the late 1920s. And it faded because of courageous newspaper editors, and they got the Klan, just like they got Al Capone, on income tax evasion. Where do you get all that money? Well, we killed people or we robbed people. I couldn't say that. But there it is, and it's a very serious threat to the United States. Hopefully we're not going to see a revival.
Hey, Dwayne, my grandfather was in the Klan in the 20s. In Elmont, they met at the pavilion.
Yeah.
My mom said it scared the crap out of
Yeah.
her. Wow.
You know, they always knew who was in the Klan because one of the people told me the dogs followed them down Elk Avenue. So whatever dog was next to the owner, you knew who the owner was.
The other thing I've heard is you knew who was in the Klan because everybody knew what people's shoes looked like. If you had a bunion in one place,
Yeah.
a scruff on your toe, you would know the person by their shoes.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
Yeah. Well, they're also Go.
Signals and stuff. But my father, okay, who was a miner in the days of the Klan, the early Klan and stuff, used against the mining, the symbols. They used to have parades up and down Elk Avenue and stuff like that. And people knew who was under the sheets and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, there was one story up on Chocolate Peak, which was at the end of Elk Avenue.
Yeah.
My dad saw a local building a cross. So he came into town and he took taking bets. There's going to be a cross burning tonight up on Chocolate Peak. And of course he won the bet.
Yeah.
But it was here, but it was anti-labor.
Yeah.
Because that was a big labor.
Well, they were also anti-Catholic, and they tried to bar wine being used in the sacraments, and of course they didn't want any Catholic schools. Next. This shows Crested Butte children heading to the movie house in 1939. Next. There is the Pueblo, the Horace mine, I think also called the Pueblo mine. And there you can see where the coal comes out, down the tram into the tipple, and then into the waiting railroad cars. Next. I should remember the name of this lady. She was murdered by a guy in 1937. Annie Mativi. Very thank you. What bar would that have been? Yeah. Yeah, she did. Yeah. Next. There's the company housing. CF&I company housing. Next. Colorado Supply Company, 1930s. Next. John Rosman's faucet. John, that's where the water ended, right? How long is that one on your ranch going to last?
A couple more weeks.
That is classic. Next. There is a tree right on Elk Avenue in the 1930s. In the 1930s, they had, well, earlier than that, they had a plaza. And they had trees and shrubbery and everything right on Elk Avenue. Next. Colorado Supply Service Station. Where is that today? Peters. Next. Driving sheep through Crested Butte, 1943. Right down the main drag. What does that say? June something? June 3rd. In a snowstorm. I hope we get some of that this year. Yeah. Yeah. Give them a round of applause. Yeah. Next. Joe, that's the one you gave me. Left to right in front, Josiah, Frank Sarika, and Chick Mufich, right? Lyle McNeil in the back, Glenn Songer, Rudy Verju. Who's the guy, Joe, on the left back? Okay, next. They were members of the Crested Butte Ski Club. There's a train leaving with the water tank in the background. This is in the 1940s. Next. Winter 1951-52. Now they got a car there on the right, and I have no idea what the hell that car's doing there. Because none of the roads were plowed and everybody drained the radiator and put the car up on blocks until springtime. I had it. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. We got a guy by the name of Ace Mulvey out of Telluride, Class C state championship pitcher. And John Stevens, my good friend, told me about this. Ace had his car up on blocks and he loved to drive. And when springtime came, you could hear, And then he would call his girlfriend up and he said, Harriet, we're going for breakfast tomorrow morning. Get ready at 5 o'clock. And Ace Mulvey would drive to Denver for breakfast and then back. He couldn't stand not driving. Next. Everybody know that house? Next. There's Crested Butte, a good panoramic shot with the railroad in the background. Next. There is the road into Crested Butte in 1963. Isn't that a great shot? Frank Zanatel told me if you didn't go by rail, there's no way you could get from Gunnison to Crested Butte because by Jack's Cabin, there was a whole big series of mud holes and you'd get stuck. So you had to come by rail until the roads thawed out. Next. There's Tony filling up. Next. There's Tony Capuchin. You can't eat scenery. Now here's a little tidbit in that bar. Later on became the Wooden Nickel, but in the late 1960s, I go into the bar after a day of skiing, sitting at the right at the bar, a hamburger, order, fries, and a Coke, and a guy walks in. Jim White is the bartender. Just passed away, Whitey. And says to Whitey, could I play my guitar at the fireplace? And Whitey said, you go right ahead. Inside of 15 minutes, the place was jammed and people were fighting to get in the door. And we were all singing, see if you can get the name of this guy. Some people say that there's a woman to blame, but I know it's my own damn fault. Who is that? Jimmy Buffett played for 3 hours, didn't cost me a nickel. 3 hours, he got free drinks. Next. Here's Frank and Gal, one of the great bars in Crested Butte. Next. Kathy Gallup, right? Cindy Gallup from Louisville. Cindy Quint from Louisville, Colorado. She was the one that played all the polkas at Frank and Gal's. Pete, have you seen that picture?
No.
That's your predecessor. Next. There are those old timers. Sandy Hickok took that great photo. Sandy, what was that, 69? Excuse me, Hortner. Sandy, what was that picture? 69, yeah. Emo Lunk on the left. Frank Hodgson. Tony Danny. Johnny Panion. Ralph Falsetto. Really? Wow. All from different countries. They were trying to kill each other, and now 51 years later, they're celebrating. Whitey Sporsich and Kathy Wirtz, the first king and queen of Flourishing. Next. That is the way the tailings pond looked at the Keystone Mine before the treatment plant went in. Next. Crested Butte, I think in the 1970s. Little mist. Next. There's the CF&I train in Crested Butte in the 1930s. I wish I could identify all those guys. What's that? Oh, is that in Sapanero, Russ? I stand correct. We got Russ Lawley here tonight, and I yield to Russ. Thank you, Russ.
I wouldn't know that if Vandenbusche didn't teach me that
Next. Has everybody in here been at the bank at Silver Hill? That's the Snowball Express Bank. Snowball Express, yeah. Next, a great shot of the East River, meandering. Next, that's one of my favorite photos. When I show that in Michigan, there's a lot of yearning for people to get out here. I think that's the last one, isn't it? I think so, yeah. Nathan, is that yours? Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. And then the last one was Springtime in the Rockies, but it's not really springtime, so we don't need to sing it. Thank you very much, everybody. Any questions or comments from the old timers?
Well done, thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.
Dr. Vandenbusche.
Yo.
Was there a lot of conflict between the cattle ranchers and the sheep herders?
In the Gunnison country? Absolutely. They killed a bunch of sheep at Iola. They killed a bunch of sheep at Obie Joyful. They killed a bunch of sheep at Taylor Park. When they asked Alonzo Hartman if he ever ate mutton, he was the head of the Gunnison stock growers, cattlemen. He said, yes, but I'm damned ashamed of it. But when the federal government got involved and that became a federal crime, that ended it.
Thank you. Got another question over here?
What happened to what? Oh, the coke ovens just torn down, leveled.
A lot of people use them in their walkways in their gardens.
Yeah.
In the old houses. We actually have some in our walkway now. And there's some out in the garden here. Wasn't it required by the CFNI to destroy it? Yes, I think so, but I think people just don't.
What's that?
I just want to thank you all so much.
Oh, really? Oh, they were.